Yeah, you recording? Okay. Hi. Hi, how you doing? Yes, we're doing a video talking about the Saudi bombing of Yemen and Britain's involvement in it. Just to have the backdrop of the Saudi embassy, little swords there.
Just join us over here, please.
Okay.
You're actually standing as the embassy property.
Are they quite touchy, the embassy then? Do they often get you to try and drag people away?
Well, it's just they're worried about security threats, that's all it is.
Well, ironically, we're talking about the extremism the Saudis export across the world because they're a threat to our security. So a lot of what you have to do, obviously keeping London streets safe, is partly having to deal with the problems that they've exported all over the world.
You're not going to get a comment off me.
I know. But in any case, we're definitely not the threat to security. The threat to security is in there.
The only air forces dropping bombs in Yemen are Saudi Arabia's.
These are British-made cluster bombs dropped by the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen. Although there is currently a ceasefire, civil war broke out in Yemen in March 2015. On one side, there's the forces of the deposed President Saleh and Houthi militia, and on the other, the Saudi-backed forces of President Hadi and anti-Houthi forces. Al-Qaeda and ISIS are fighting both sides. All stand accused of war crimes. But Britain is culpable because our government is backing and arming the Saudi-led coalition.
The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Great Britain have enjoyed very strong and historic ties.
According to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Saudi-led coalition is responsible for twice as many civilian deaths as all the other forces in Yemen put together. The country is now in the midst of one of the worst humanitarian crises on earth, leaving around 2.5 million Yemenis internally displaced and tens of thousands of refugees fleeing the country. I'm in Djibouti, slap bang in the middle of the Horn of Africa, just next to Ethiopia, and I'm on my way now to the Makazi refugee camp, where thousands of Yemenis have made the crossing across the water, fleeing the conflict in their own country.
كان الوضع صعب جدا بسبب انهم كسروا مدارسنا المستشفيات حقنا مساجد.
Were your schools destroyed? Were your... Could you hear the planes coming?
Yes, we are afraid. We are like choking, moving from room to room.
كان الحرب مرة تيجي الطيران يضرب مدرسة يموتوا أطفال يموتوا نساء يموتوا ناس يعني كبيرين في السن يموت من يموت يقولوا هذا كان لنا في هذه مدرسة حوثية لكن كان داخل طلاب.
I ask myself why the plane come very close sometimes. Why they do like that? They make us scared. It's like a bad dream.
الناس هم من قلبهم رايحين يصلوا والطيارة تجي تقصف المساجد. في منهم اللي تعوروا في اللي رجعوا والملابس محرقة
When the planes are that close, people
I prefer to die, to feel like that. Because I feel my soul is coming up and down, up and down. I can't breathe. I tell myself I can't stand that. I want to move.
يعني يمنا صح حرب بس كانت في أوقات نشوفها حلوة جدا. يعني بلادي كذا كذا بحبني حتى لو الآن هنا واشتاق له هناك حتى اشتاق لأصدقائي اللي ماتوا.
Hey, it's okay. It's okay.
عن اليمن حق اللي هناك. يعني حتى لو رحت آخر الدنيا مكان برجع اليمن ديك اللي تحطمت كسرها الحوثي سعودي إيراني.
It's okay. Let's stop. That's enough. I can't even begin to imagine what someone that, for someone that age to go through that amount of cruelty is just pretty difficult to understand and appreciate. I went to meet Alan Duncan, the government's special envoy to Yemen, to challenge him about Britain's support for the Saudi-led war effort. Saudi Arabia is one of our closest allies, but would you not accept it's one of the most unpleasant regimes on the face of the earth?
Look, all of these countries have emerged in the last 100 years. You have a problem with people in Saudi Arabia far more than you do with the regime. When you have a country like Saudi Arabia in the Gulf, in a world which risks being very, very unstable, I think dismissive disengagement is not realpolitik, if you like.
There's a difference between dismissive disengagement and arming them to the teeth and supporting them. You know, when their dictator dies, we put the flag at half-mast to mourn his death. We don't do that with many other dictatorships.
Well, you call it a dictatorship. It's not a dictatorship, actually.
Saudi Arabia?
No.
Come on.
No,
it has no democratic elections. It has no free political parties.
I've watched the Arab world for many, many years, and the one thing I do feel very strongly about is that stability is very important. And if we think that, you know, a bit like the Shah of Iran, oh God, they're like the Saudis, get rid of them, what will replace them would be far, far worse. It's like ISIS on every street corner, and you get more than heads chopped off in public, I tell you.
Well, the Saudi regime is probably one of the most oppressive in the world. It began this year by beheading 50 people and crucifying them. It's a regime which tortures people routinely, which regularly locks up protesters, which carries out a whole manner of grotesque human rights violations, both in Saudi Arabia but now in Yemen as well.
Do you think that Saudi Arabia is arguably a threat to national security?
What we're seeing in Yemen is going to be fueling extremism. We're seeing a humanitarian catastrophe has been unleashed over the last 12 months by the Saudi-led bombardment. And UK arms have been central to that. UK political support has kind of underpinned it as well. And we have no idea what's going to happen when a weapon leaves these shores. Very often the lifespan of a weapon is longer than the lifespan of the government who bought it. It means entrusting some of the most brutal dictatorships in the world, like Saudi Arabia, with the means to kill.
So what exactly does Britain stand accused of? I went to ask Rashid Mohammed, Yemen researcher at Amnesty International. The very, very serious allegation is British culpability in alleged war crimes in Yemen. Now, can you tell me categorically what that culpability is?
Under the Arms Trade Treaty, if there's even a risk of weapons being transferred to another country being used to facilitate violations of international humanitarian law, you are supposed to suspend sales immediately. Since the start of the conflict, the UK government has allowed the transfer of 2.9 billion worth of weapons to Saudi alone. 1 billion worth of those weapons are bombs. Bombs that we have shown and other organizations have shown have been used in direct violation of international humanitarian law. On the Saudi-led coalition side, we've documented over 32 unlawful airstrikes that have killed over 300 civilians, 127 children amongst them.
Amnesty International have made a very serious allegation. British-made cluster bombs have been found in Yemen. Now, obviously, we're a signatory to a convention, an international convention, which bans cluster bombs. These were sold in the past. But those are British cluster bombs. Doesn't that render us culpable?
I haven't actually seen this evidence, and it's very easy to make the accusation. It's more difficult for it to be proven and for it to be established, but they must be investigated. We don't want cluster bombs either, and I think actually the UK sets a very, very high standard where we can, but the Yemen one is very, very difficult when the Houthis and the Saleh forces are playing all sorts of tricks and, of course, have created this in the first place.
We're not culpable for the Houthis. We're not arming them. We're not supporting them. But we're supporting a military coalition which is dropping cluster bombs, which are definitely killing civilians.
You are making that statement as if it is certain and definite.
You accept cluster bombs are being used, surely?
I don't know if I can or cannot accept that. My understanding is that it is clearly the view of the government at the moment that our weapons have not been used in breach of humanitarian law.
The UK government is effectively saying that the United Nations is wrong, that the European Parliament is wrong, that Amnesty International is wrong, that Oxfam is wrong, that Safer World is wrong, that Human Rights Watch is wrong, that all these other great NGOs are wrong.
But the Saudis are right.
Yeah, and it seems to be purely on the basis of Saudi Arabia has investigated this and assures us everything is fine. Now, if Saudis can't be trusted to hold free and fair elections, how can they be trusted to investigate themselves for war crimes?
The issue is, and this is the absolute fundamental point, it's that the British people deserve transparency as to what its government is doing in its name, particularly if civilians are dying as a consequence.
But you keep on going back to civilians being killed. I'm afraid civilians do get killed in conflict. I don't want any of them to be killed. We regret all of them.
But most have been killed by the Saudi-led coalition, according to the United Nations.
Well, I wonder actually if that is true once you really find out what's happening on the ground.
Should we have an inquiry? Surely we have a duty to look at whether civilians have died because of British support.
Well, I think we are actually insisting that that is happening. I think there have been, I don't know, perhaps half a dozen instances where it has been put to us that UK weapons might, landed on a hospital or something. And so, of course, we've demanded an inquiry and want to know what's happening.
Yemen is a war that just isn't getting the global attention that it needs. And like lots of conflicts, it's both horrific and very complicated. For me, I think it's absolutely critical, a time when it's all too often not that much sympathy for refugees. When there's a conflict in which our country has direct involvement in some shape or other, then we have a responsibility to listen to the plight of those refugees and think very carefully about what we can do to help, including putting pressure on our own government.
This is the first time in my life I'm a refugee. After I live here, I think I will do something with the refugee. I want to help people.
Because having been a refugee, you want to help other people like
because
you?
I feel it. Now I feel what the refugee feel. Now I understand them.